Welcome to the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs, and a couple weeks ago we lost one of the most popular game show hosts, if not the most popular game show host ever, Bob Barker, at the age of 99. And tributes around the country poured into CBS as well as Fremantle, which used to be Mark Goodson, Bill Todman Productions, and people online were talking about Bob, both those who used to watch him and those who were contestants on The Price is Right. And with me today is somebody who worked with Bob Barker for about a dozen years. And I used to listen to him early in the morning, going to school back in the late 80s on a station. He did a show with his good friend, singer-songwriter Bob Bennett. And it's an honor to have with us an author, a comedian, a host. And I'm probably going to go through the list. I'm going to miss something. But Dan Rupple, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Josh. Good to talk to you again.
Well, tell us about your background and how that eventually led to working at CBS.
Okay, I'll try to be quick because I've worked in Hollywood for over 45 years, so I don't think you really want to go that long. But it was a really great story how I got started. When I was about 15 in the high school drama department, I was exposed to this thing called comedy improv. And I just took to it, Josh. Man, I thought this is so great. So we formed a little group of comedy improv players, and we started doing like high school assemblies and different civic events and things like that. And then I got real bold. And again, I want to note I was 15, and I said, "Hey, let's drive up to the Hollywood clubs." We lived only about 20 minutes from Hollywood. And one of the guys in the group had his license. So we went up there and we would play the Ice House, the Troubadour, the Comedy Store, which had just opened, all these iconic clubs in Hollywood. And occasionally they'd bust me. They busted me one time at the Comedy Store because I was only 15. And they go, "Hey, we serve alcohol here." And they said, "Well, you can go on anyway. I'll tell you what, wait in the bushes. And then we're going to, once we introduce you, there's a door that leads right to the stage. Just go up on the stage, do your set, walk right out that door, and just keep on going. Don't go in the bar area." So I did that. But anyway, this went into our college years. And we were doing really well, Josh. We were opening for Lily Tomlin, and we were actually considered for the very first cast of Saturday Night Live. I don't think you know this. In 1975, when Lorne Michaels was getting ready to launch Saturday Night Live, he sent scouts out to Hollywood and said, "Find the best sketch improv players." And they scoured the clubs, and they narrowed it down to my group and Al Franken and Tom Davis. And we did a showcase at the Hollywood Canteen, and thank God they picked Al Franken and Tom Davis because 2 years later, I became a Christian, and I was alone in my bedroom, and I won't go into the whole thing, but it's just a wonderful story of God redeeming me. And I became a Christian, and I said, "Well, boy, I gotta leave the group," because we were doing kind of blue stuff in clubs. And so I show up at rehearsal, Josh, and I'm ready to quit the group. So I said, we were a 3-man group in those days, and I said, I'm going to have to leave the group because I've become a Christian. And it's just not in line with my new faith. And one of my partners, Dave, he said, "Well, I was going to leave the group tonight because last week I became a Christian." And then we turned to Larry, and Larry says, "Last week I rededicated my life to Christ." And we just said, "Whoa, God's up to something." And that's what today is thought of as the beginning of Christian comedy. And we changed the name of the group to Isaac Air Freight. And many of your old listeners will maybe remember us. And, we went on for the next 15 years and sold about 500,000 records and toured extensively. And it was just a wonderful ride. And now it's wonderful to see real great comedic talent following our footsteps. And, there's just some great, especially stand-ups today working throughout the country. Anyway, I got tired of 15 years. I got tired of traveling, and I just felt it was time to leave the group. I quit the group after 15 years. They all agreed they were quitting too. And then the show you mentioned, I got this call from KBRT Radio, and they said, we have a morning slot open. Would you like to host it? And I said, I just left my comedy group. Yes, I'd love to. And can I bring along my best friend since we were little kids, Bob Bennett, who your listeners might know as a singer-songwriter, as you mentioned. And so we did that for the next 3 years. And then they had a change of format, and I didn't have a job. And then a close friend of mine who I co-taught an adult Sunday school class at our church with, he was at the time, now he's president, but he was at the time director of CBS Studios. Mm. And we were having dinner, and I said, hey, is there any kind of openings? And he says, too bad you don't have a game show. And I did. I had a game show I had developed of a Milton Bradley game. We pitched it to CBS. We got a developmental deal. All systems go, but we had to get I was thinking Mark Goodson you mentioned earlier. We had to get Milton Bradley to okay it. It was a existing board game for Milton Bradley. And I won't go into the politics of it, but they would not give us the rights. Mm. So the whole deal fell through. But at that exact time, they needed a supervising producer on The Price is Right. So Mike hired me. I worked directly for CBS, not for Goodson in those days. Mm. I worked for CBS. And if you know anything about TV production, there's above the line, which is your actors, your creatives, your writers, your directors, Bob Barker, all of that. And then you have below the line, which is your cameraman, your technical director, all the production elements. And that was my role, to supervise the below the line, who were really mostly CBS employees. So I was there for a little over 10 years. We did a roughly 200 shows, Price is Right, a year. And so I probably supervised about 2,000 different shows, and I can play a lot of those games in my sleep. So it was a wonderful 10 years, though. And I've been gone for 23 years, but I'm still in touch. They're still family. Mm-hmm. I talk to different people who I worked with, on a regular basis, and they're all dear friends. And we were just really a tight family all those years.
Describe your first meeting with Bob Barker.
Boy, I was nervous because I'd grown up like most of America did on Truth or Consequences and his first big show, and then the early years of Price is Right. Because I think it started. The original one was Bill Cullen way back, but
yeah.
The new version with Barker, I think, started in 73, if I'm not mistaken.
72, close, yeah.
72?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I knew it was around that time. And I came in 90, so they were already well established, like around 25 years or so, a little bit more. And I came in, and so, he's a legend. Like you said, every school kid in America, when they were sick and couldn't go to school, they would watch The Price is Right. Yep. And not to mention the college students and the people at home. I mean, it's the game show of all time. And so I walked in, and I'm like I said, I'm kind of nervous. But he was very friendly to me, and he can be a little guarded, not in a mean way or anything. He could be a little guarded until he got to know you. It was kind of like, I'm not going to, there's such a demand for me, and I'm so famous. It's like, I'm going to reserve judgment, on whether this guy's my inner circle or not. Mm-hmm. And, but fortunately it was just a very quick thing where he just really respected me, and we had a very good relationship. During that time, my wife battled cancer a couple times. He was the first to send flowers to the hospital. Oh. He would routinely ask me, Dan, how's your wife? How's she doing? we met her numerous times when, we had rap parties or Christmas parties or things like that we would do on the stage after we did the show. And he was very friendly to me, so I really enjoyed working with him.
That's great. And I remember you're right about The Price is Right, that Truth or Consequences began in 1956. And I don't know if you ever heard the story about how he got that job. He spoke at a game show Congress convention about 19 years ago, and he said that when Ralph Edwards brought Truth or Consequences back in 1956, they were looking for a new host because Jack Bailey, who had done it the previous 3 years, was now doing Queen for a Day. And so Ralph Edwards held auditions in L.A. as well as New York, couldn't find anybody from those list of MCs or potential MCs that auditioned. Nobody stood out, nobody impressed him. So he thought, okay, let me go and do some more auditions in a couple weeks. But in the meantime, he was in L.A. where he lived, and he was listening to the radio and heard Bob Barker on there. He said, I really like the way this guy's doing this live audience participation show. But he couldn't remember the station that he was listening to. He went back and forth around the dial, and so for about 2 weeks he was like scrambling, oh my goodness, where is this Bob that I really love? So he finally found it was like 1230 KGFJ, which was a weak signal in Southern California. So he called the station. They gave him Bob's number, and then Bob comes home that day, and his wife, Dorothy Jo, says, hey, Bob, Ralph Edwards called. He said, the Ralph Edwards? She says, yeah, the Ralph Edwards. He wants you to audition. So he went down and auditioned, and Ralph Edwards said, you're my new host. And so the network went to Edwards and said, hey, do you have I got a host. And he said, really cool. Who is it? He said, Bob Barker. And they're like, who? Bob Barker. We don't want some no name. We want a well-known name. He says, trust me, he's going to be really good. And he would not budge. He says, look, please let him host the show. And they said, okay, on this one condition, that the first episode, you enter first, talk to the audience, and then introduce Bob. He's like, okay. And so he did. And the show was a 9-year hit on NBC Daytime. A year off, and there was another 9-year hit in syndication, in which time I think the third to last year in syndication is when he got The Price is Right. And even that was kind of a last-minute thing, because originally Mark Goodson wanted Dennis James to host both the network daytime as well as the prime time. But Brad James, Dennis's son, confirmed to me that Dennis was too associated with NBC, and that's why CBS didn't want him. Plus, Bob also had a contract with CBS to host like the Pillsbury Bake Off, the Rose Parade, the Miss Universe pageant, and several other specials I can't remember right now. And so they said to him, we want you to host The Price is Right. He said, no, I'm not going to do The Price is Right. I'll host Joker's Wild, and I'll host Gambit, the other two shows that were going to debut that day. And Bud Grant said, no, Barker, you will host Price is Right, because those are good games that require a traffic cop, and that's not you. So he said, okay.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you, Josh, I worked with a lot of A-list talent. As you know, I also supervised David Letterman for 8 years. When Dave would travel outside of New York, I'd supervise those shows in L.A. or San Francisco, or when he sent his mom to the Olympics or whatever he did, I would do those segments. But Barker was the consummate professional. I've never seen anyone like him. He rarely made a mistake. We did the show live to tape. Mm-hmm. And the only time we'd either stop tape or they'd have to do major edits is when a game broke. And that would happen every once in a while. It'd break, and we have to stop, and they'd get it to work again. Then we would finish it and, of course, do an edit. But I can only recall maybe once a year they never had to stop tape because of Bob. Mm-hmm. But maybe once a year, they would have to edit out a little glitch. It was something he did. But it was so infrequently. But the other thing, or there's two other things I want to tell you. Another thing is, sometimes after the show wrapped, we'd let the audience go, and then he would do little station ID plugs type thing. It's like, or a new station would join the syndication, and they'd say, What's the Price is Right on blah 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 in Des Moines, every night at 8:00 or something like that. And you know this with your radio background, but he would do those kinds of plugs, and they each would vary. Some would be, okay, there's a 15-second, okay, there's a 30-second, or a 10-second, or whatever. The stage manager wouldn't even have to count him down. He just had this internal clock, and he would nail it.
Wow.
Right on the spot. I mean, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 15 seconds. He was right on. But the greatest thing, I was telling this man yesterday, he said, weren't you involved in The Price is Right? And I was telling him this story. People in the regular audience, you don't know what an unbelievable hard job he had in hosting The Price is Right. People, the great professionals, be it sports or whatever, they make something really almost impossibly hard. They make it look easy. And he had that ability, along with some other very gifted game show hosts, to make it look easy. But if you think of what he would do, Josh, on Bidder's Row, one of the four would win the winning bid. They'd come up on stage. From the time they started coming up on the stage till he started the first game, their game, he had maybe 30 seconds. On maybe a good chance he might have 40 seconds. But in that time, he had to introduce the guest or the contestant. Mm-hmm. He had to find out something about him that would be interesting to the audience. And this is the hardest part. He had to somehow endear them to the audience so the audience would root for them. If the audience doesn't like the contestant, they're not going to root for him, and it's not a very good game, Mm-hmm. If everyone's not screaming behind him, the price or whatever. But then the fourth thing he does is he has to explain the game if they don't know it. And even if they do know it, he's got to tell the audience at home who haven't seen it before. So he's got to, quickly say that. And he accomplishes all that seamlessly in 30, 40 seconds. Mm-hmm. And it's like unbelievable. So I sat there for like 2,000 shows going, wow.
I loved it when
you do that.
I loved it when the audience would get out of control and ruckus and just kind of like, oh my gosh, what do you do? And Bob would always go, audience. Should we give them the prize anyway? Yeah. Right. All right. And actually, in kids' church, for about a year and a half, I did this mock game show where I wore a tacky tie and a plaid suit. And one day the kids were getting very ruckusy and like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So I just channeled Bob Barker and it calmed them down.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, he was so good, and he was very intelligent, and he had a wonderful wit, and he could just take a very boring game, a very boring contestant, and turn it into just really compelling, humorous, funny, television. And he would just do that show after show after show. So it was just really, it was great to watch him, up close for that many shows.
It's the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs. We're talking with Dan Rupple, who was the supervisor producer at CBS for over a dozen years, and he worked with Bob Barker, as we remember, the legendary Price is Right host who we lost a couple of weeks ago. Now, next time, Dan brings us behind the scenes of the Price is Right for some very interesting stories, gives us a kind of a guided tour about what goes on behind the scenes of the show as the day progresses. So you don't want to miss that. Also, don't miss out on our website. My Instagram is JoshDJ57. That's JoshDJ57. Follow me there. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel here at the Talking Archive. And we'll talk to you again as we continue our conversation with Dan Rupple.